You are listening to the Warrior Project podcast, where mindset, tribe, and violence meet.
My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Project podcast. Visit thewarriorproject.com to join us behind the wall of the Warrior Project tribe. On that website, you'll find not only an archive of all the episodes of this podcast, but you'll also find the way to become a member of the Warrior Project tribe, my membership site, which has hundreds of hours of archived episodes, but probably a little bit more usefully, it has listed a whole collection of power programs, which are video and audio series programs of ways to empower one's life, very much in line with the philosophy that I share during this podcast. All that being said, welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. Today we have an interesting query, one that comes with it somewhat of a connotation of controversy, but we could move past that, I think. At this point, you guys know who I am, you know what I'm about, and you know that I do not pull punches, and where this conversation is headed, no punches will be pulled. So the query for this episode: what is a victim? What is a victim? So I know everybody has an idea of what a victim is, but very much like a lot of concepts that tend to make people emotional and tend to sort of be connected to traumatic type events and ideas and concepts, being a victim is not what most people would try and sell you on it being. My definition of a victim is one who suffers because of decisions made exclusively by others. A victim is one who suffers because of decisions made exclusively by others. So in order for there to be a victim, there needs to be suffering. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, piece by piece at this definition and sort of add a little depth of understanding to what exactly I'm trying to convey, this idea of a victim. So a victim is one who suffers. Now, when we talk about suffering, I believe it was the last episode, spoke about do real men cry? And I got into traumatic damage and being able to have some sort of cathartic process that allows somebody to deal with it. But all that being said, suffering exists. People do suffer. But the thing is, we suffer at different amounts to different degrees. We have people who you tell them that it looks like they put on 10 pounds and they're ready to jump off of a bridge. You tell other people that they're the dumbest person they've ever met, and the person laughs at you and doesn't give it a second thought. So the amount of, I would say, resilience that the individual has greatly determines, actually specifically determines, how much suffering one may endure during the course of a regular day. Now, obviously, there are universal sufferings, right? Chop somebody's hand off, they're going to feel it. Doesn't matter how tough they are, doesn't matter how stoic they may think they are, doesn't matter how much they dislike their hand, right? It's going to hurt. You chop it off. So there is a suffering that gets into the realm of sort of universal experience. Okay, so suffering, when we look at suffering, it could be for very real reasons. And those are the universal reasons that I was just describing. Or it could be more of a personalized level of resilience and being able to sort of put up enough of a wall to would-be, suffering or would-be trauma. And it could also be just a way that we process normal experiences. I know that during the course of my days, there are plenty of things that I know I get ticked off at, that I know somebody else wouldn't even give a second thought. And I know there are things that would traumatize other people that I don't give a second thought. So there is a very individualized part of the spectrum of suffering, right? But whatever it is, it exists, and it exists for a whole slew of reasons. Getting back to the definition, though, a victim is somebody who suffers because of decisions made exclusively by others. So to decide, right? So to decide, and there was a point where I probably a little bit more accurately knew the root and the etymology of the word decide, but the idea of it is sort of choosing a path, and the act of making a decision is not only choosing that path, but also getting rid of or allowing to fall by the wayside all other paths that were, that were available to you. So it's not a matter of choose this one. It's choose this one and don't choose all the other ones, right? So to decide is to sort of cut off all other options and choose one that you have the opportunity to choose. Well, if we're talking about victims, decisions is really at the core of where the identity lies. Decisions determine suffering. Decisions determine accountability. And ultimately, decisions determine whether somebody is a victim or not. So if somebody is suffering because of decisions that were made, well, we understand then that there are sort of players in this game. There are roles that have been had and played out that have led to the conclusion of the individual's suffering. If you are somebody who, you are born and you have some sort of degenerative condition that leads you to lose your life in mere days or weeks of living, well, not many decisions were made by you. And two classifications of individuals who we sort of allow a pass on when it comes to this very important decision-making process, right, or decision-making status, are children. Children who have decisions made for them, or children who are not yet ready to make decisions, right? So these are one of the categories that we sort of give a pass to. And the other category of individuals that gets a pass are people who do not have the cognitive ability to make decisions. People who are mentally ill, people who are retarded, people who have some sort of medical condition that prevents them from processing information to the point where they can make a worthwhile decision, right? So children and the mentally ill or mentally deficient, these people get passes. Why? Because they do not make the decisions that could lead to them suffering. And we could say that because of the definition that I've laid out there, if there is suffering experienced by those individuals, there is absolutely a victim label that they deserve. So we say a victim is one who suffers because of decisions made exclusively by others. So if you are somebody who can make a decision and you find yourself suffering, and when you now look back and look at the step-by-step road that has led you to the predicament that has caused your suffering, you would have to ask yourself, is there any fork in the road, so to speak, during this whole, list of events that have led here where I made a decision? And this is the uncomfortable part of people determining whether or not they are truly victims. So a phrase that was first told to me by a good buddy of mine, Tom Kyer, he said, there are no victims, only volunteers. There are no victims, only volunteers. So obviously there's something of a caveat to that, right? The little asterisk that we put on the bottom of that definition where we say, except children and mentally deficient. There are no victims, only volunteers. So what exactly do we mean when we say that? Because I'm in complete agreement, and that assessment or that statement is very much congruent with everything I've said up to this point. There are no victims, only volunteers. Well, what is a volunteer if not somebody who chooses to participate in a certain act? Somebody who chooses a direction at a given fork in the road. That is a volunteer. Somebody who activates his ability to make a decision through preference, through mission, through whatever the case is, really. Somebody who has a choice and makes it. And if you are an individual who is experiencing some form of suffering, chances are, if you're not one of those two categories we mentioned, chances are you are not a victim. Because there is, in the many little linked events that have led to your suffering, one of those links belongs to you. I recall a little over a year ago at this point, there was that mass shooting in an Orlando nightclub. And I remember when that first happened, as tragic an event as it was, there were many people who were, understandably, emotionally affected, emotionally somewhat traumatized. And I was the person who, trying to remain consistent, somewhat empathetic to people's experiences and reactions to these types of events, but consistent nonetheless. I had mentioned, well, all of these people who were in that club volunteered for this to happen. And I know what you're saying. It doesn't sound too sensitive, Justin. I never said I was good at it, folks. But I try, right? So the no victims, only volunteers assessment, right, of that, experience of all of the people who died so tragically in that Orlando nightclub. When I said it, a lot of people, obviously and somewhat expectedly in hindsight, had an emotional reaction towards me putting that out, and I'm being accused of being insensitive, okay, being crass, okay, not caring about people's feelings, I'll give you that somewhat, but just don't accuse me of being inaccurate or inconsistent, because those are the things that I'm worried about. So when I was talking about that situation, I recall during what started as a conversation sort of evolved into a debate and eventually grew to an outright argument. I remember telling somebody, listen, all of the people who go to that nightclub or nightclubs like it from this day forward are going to do things a little differently. And they're going to do those things differently because they have the experience of having seen that massacre take place. And they're going to say, you know what? I'm going to make this decision instead of that one. I'm going to make this decision instead of that one. Because should a situation like that arise again, I'm going to be in a better situation to handle it. Now, I will say one of the things that is understandable, if, I wouldn't really necessarily let people off the hook for it, but sometimes people cannot even conceptualize the possibilities of their actions. They cannot even conceptualize what could actually happen in reality. Those people that were in that nightclub, I guarantee you that if you asked any one of them, what are the odds that somebody's going to come in here and start just shooting dozens of people? Every single one of them would have said, well, the chances are zero, or I wouldn't be here. But then, sure enough, it happened. And when it happened, one of the things I like to say is when we look at the past and we look at what has happened, probability needs to be acknowledged as being 100%. So the way that I explain that is I say, well, if that person came in there and massacred all those people, and it happened, that meant that it was always going to happen. Because there it is. There it is. We look at it, and it is now in our past as having happened. So the probability of that happening was 100%. Now, what's the probability of it happening again? Well, that is where everybody's probability tends to reside. They tend to not always look at the past. They tend to look at the future, and they say, well, I don't know. And they infuse their own biases. They infuse their opinions and preferences. They infuse something of their level of comfort when dealing with certain types of events and the potential trauma associated with them. And they think, well, you know what? It could happen, but probably not. And these people are making educated decisions, but they are making decisions nonetheless. So the person who goes into the club after that horrific tragedy and says, I'm going to do this differently, I say, good for you. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the general conversation, well, what was stopping all of the people who were murdered during that massacre from doing this too. And when you follow a disciplined definition of victimization, you maintain an accountability that motivates individuals to pursue better ways to go about their lives. Are you looking to avoid the suffering that our lives tend to provide for us every now and again? Well, if you are, what is the thought process? What is the process by which you develop the protocols that will avoid that suffering moving forward? It has to be based on the past, and it can never be by following this mindset that, you know what, it happened to me and I had no say in the matter. I couldn't help it. This is the worst. There was nothing I could do. Nobody learns from that. If you fail a math test, you don't say, well, you know what, the chance of me failing that math test was obviously 100%, because there it is. There's that big fat F. And it wasn't my fault. It was always going to happen, and I just hope it doesn't happen again. Remove the suffering. Some people may suffer from that, but remove the suffering, and we understand just how illogical a process that actually is. Well, that's all I'm presenting this as. I'm just presenting the definition of a victim as the process, or at least the impetus for a process that allows us to avoid suffering at our own hands, whether it be from bad decision making or the bad decisions that go along with not being prepared for the life that we're ultimately going to lead. Visit MasterChim.com. That's where you get the Master Chim letter. Well, it's where you sign up for it, at least. The Master Chim letter is my daily morning email. I send it out and I'm talking about things, a lot of the same things I talk about in the podcast. Just another way for me to get content out to you. But it also gives me the ability to give you updates and announcements on either programs or events that I'm hosting, whether it's a Vio Prep program or a new shirt that I happen to be offering for listeners of the podcast. Whatever it is, the information can be found by signing up at masterchim.com. It's free, and of course, I don't share your email with anybody. Thank you guys for listening to this. I know you're busy. I know every minute you spend with me is a minute you probably could be doing something else with. So I do appreciate that. And I look forward to talking to you guys on the next episode. Remember, warriors, someone believes in you. Prove them right.